Is Marshawn Lynch a Hall of Famer? Now, it's a tricky question because a lot of times the Hall of Fame in football is based off a lot of numbers and how much you were a figure in the NFL. And with Marshawn Lynch, he definitely has one of these sides for him going his way, which was he's part of the 2010s All-Decade Team Hall of Fame, and he's one of those guys that was a face of the NFL for a while. I'm not saying he was as much of a face as, let's say, quarterbacks during the time like Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, all those different names. But when it came to running backs or position players even, on top of wide receivers and whoever else you want to put in there, and he was one of the faces of the league for position players and definitely the face of running backs, along with, guys like Adrian Peterson and a few others. But if you look at the endorsements with Skittle and the way that he was a big name during the Super Bowl and all the "I'm just here so I don't get fined" interviews, he was one of the faces of the league, especially during that 2-year stretch when the Seahawks went to back-to-back Super Bowls. But it's not easy to make the Hall of Fame. Let's look. The average Hall of Fame running back numbers is 151 games, 10,991 yards, and 86 touchdowns. Now, he's above the touchdown number. He's slightly below the rushing yard number. And there's one other number metric in terms of awards that he's a little bit below, which is the average of 3-time first-team All-Pros. He's a 1-time All-Pro in the NFL. But I do like to look at where he stands overall. When you look at the numbers in the all-time rushing yards leaders in NFL history, he's in good company. He is at number 29 in the entire league. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's look at his numbers and let's talk about why I'm talking about Marshawn Lynch being in the Hall of Fame. Beast mode dominated the NFL. He was a 5-time Pro Bowler, a 1-time All-Pro, a 1-time Super Bowl champ, and if they handed him the ball, coming from a Seahawks fan, you see the Sonics hat here maybe, he should be a 2-time Super Bowl champ, 10,413 rushing yards, 94 touchdowns, Hall of Fame of the all 2010s decade team, 4.2 yards per carry, which is hard to do over a career, and 6 1,000-plus yard seasons. So the resume, just based on the resume and the eye test that we have, he's a guy that should be in the Hall of Fame. And when I say the eye test, let's talk about this. Who has 2 iconic runs like he does over the last 10, 15 years? I don't know if you can name a running back in the NFL that has as memorable of a run as the Beastquake against the Saints. I think it was the 7-9 Seahawks at the time that snuck into the playoffs, winning a bad division, second year of Pete Carroll. And they beat the New Orleans Saints because they got that home game, and Marshawn Lynch pushed Darren Sharper on that play and had one of the most iconic runs in NFL history, the Beastquake that caused an earthquake on the scale in Seattle at the time. It caused a little earthquake, the little shiver of the ground at the time in the area of the stadium. That's something that not every running back has, not even Hall of Fame running backs. And then on top of that, he followed that up with Beastquake 2.0 against Arizona, where he had a very similar run. Obviously, a little bit of less implications. It was not in the playoffs. It wasn't, as crazy as the first one. But I'm talking about a guy who has 2 memorable runs that almost everybody who's a football fan, whether you're a Seahawks fan or just an NFL, diehard fan that watches every Sunday, or a fantasy football guy that, pretty much knows a lot of the legendary plays that happen in football. The type of dude that remembers the Chandler Jones pushing down Mac Jones to win the game for the Raiders. The type of guy that remembers those type of plays. It's a very random example I gave you, but you know what I'm talking about. You'll remember Marshawn Lynch's 2 beast mode, Beastquake runs. And not every player can have that. And when you look at who's in this class, who's eligible for the 2025 Hall of Fame, a lot of these guys have memorable moments, but not every single one has signature moments like Marshawn Lynch does. But this list is going to make you feel old. It made me feel old as a guy who just turned 30, but I still feel old reading this list. the people who are eligible are the reason it's going to be hard for Marshawn Lynch to probably make it first ballot with these names. You have Eli Manning, Terrell Suggs, Earl Thomas, another Seahawks legend, Aqib Talib, Adam Vinatieri, Luke Kuechly, and Marshall Yanda. That's a hard list to compete with, right? Eli Manning, I think a lot of people thought he might not be a Hall of Famer, but he won 2 Super Bowls, beat Tom Brady. Terrell Suggs is going to get in there. Earl Thomas, Adam Vinatieri, probably the best kicker ever. He's going to get in there. Aqib Talib. Marshawn Lynch has a tough competition here to get in. But when we go back to the numbers, let's talk about some of these players. Marshawn Lynch, yes, he's kind of at the bottom of the list borderline of guys who aren't in the Hall of Fame yet, like Ricky Watters, Jamal Lewis, Tiki Barber, Eddie George. A lot of those names that are in the 2,000 rushing yards list. Once you get to 11,000 and up, it becomes a lot more likely you are going to be in the Hall of Fame. And there's other guys that probably will make it eventually, like Adrian Peterson, who sits at 5th with 14,000 yards. But you go all the way to the top, Emmitt Smith with 18,000 yards, Walter Payton with 16, Barry Sanders is in there at 15,000, Curtis Martin, LaDainian Tomlinson, Jerome Bettis, Eric Dickerson. All these guys are at the 11,000 plus. Once we get below 11,000, there's a couple guys that haven't made the Hall of Fame. Fred Taylor, Steven Jackson, Corey Dillon, LaShawn McCoy, Warwick Dunn. I always get that one mixed up. Ricky Watters, Jamal Lewis, etc. Eddie George hasn't made it. But there are some guys in the 11,000 range that did. A guy like O.J. Simpson and John Riggins, they both made it in the 11,000 range. Now, that doesn't exclude Marshawn Lynch from making the Hall of Fame. Like we said, there are things like memorable runs that are going to boost him in some way, right? Like what people remember him, the signature moments. There are things that are going to boost him, like a Super Bowl championship, like helping the Seahawks have one of the best run games in football for multiple years in a row. If it wasn't for Marshawn Lynch in that run game and that offensive line, young Russell Wilson probably wouldn't have led a team to the Super Bowl by himself on the offensive side. Obviously, they had a great defense, but you needed a good run game, a good young quarterback, and a good defense, and that's what they had. And there are some guys below the 10,400 mark. He sits at 29 out of 30. He's the 29th most rushing yards in the history of the NFL, so let's not forget that. There are some guys below him that made it. Joe Perry from the 1940s made it. Earl Campbell made it with 9,400. Jim Taylor made it at 8,500. You go down the list. There are Terrell Davis, shorter career. What was it? 7 years, 7,600 yards, made it. But a lot of the guys at the yardage below these numbers, that's only below the 10,000 mark. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players to ever make 8. To ever make the Hall of Fame, it looks like maybe 9. In terms of rushing yards for just pure running backs, there obviously are quarterbacks that have 5,000 or 6,000 rushing yards in there that will make the Hall of Fame as well. But with Marshawn Lynch, I think he's one of those guys like Eddie George that's going to be a borderline Hall of Famer. But when I think about Eddie George, yes, he might have been a little more dominant for a few years than Marshawn Lynch. But I don't have the same memories with Eddie George as I do Marshawn Lynch. Even Tiki Barber at some point. Marshawn Lynch was the face of the league when it comes to running backs. I mean, the guy was on commercials. Even in Buffalo before he was on the Seahawks, he was one of those guys that had that Applebee's segment on ESPN and Dave and Buster's segment that everyone will always remember. He had all those moments. Once they won the Super Bowl, he was on the Skittles commercials, on Jimmy Kimmel doing like diving into Skittles, into like a box of Skittles. He has these memorable moments on top of those runs that are signature moments. And the one thing with him that I'll always go back to is signature moments. Not every running back has a signature moment. Not every running back has those memories that no one will ever forget in their lifetime. And Marshawn Lynch is one of those guys. I am biased because I'm a Seahawks fan, but to me, even though it's a hard class, I hope he gets in either this one or soon. Like I said, Super Bowl champ, All-Pro, 10,413 rushing yards, 94 touchdowns. I think it really would have helped if he had one more year under his belt in his prime and got to 100 touchdowns and 11,000 plus yards, that would have definitely changed the game. That would have made it completely a guarantee that he's probably in the Hall of Fame. So he is borderline. I'm not going to be so biased where I say it's a guarantee, but I'm hoping Marshawn Lynch gets in, and I'm really rooting for him too, because he was an awesome dude to have on the Seahawks and an awesome face of the running backs in the NFL. There's a couple guys from this generation, like the Adrian Petersons, the Marshawn Lynches, the Derrick Henrys, who's at 9,500. He's going to get in eventually. Ezekiel Elliott's at 8,900. There's some guys that are going to make it, but I hope Marshawn Lynch is one of them. And if you love stories like this and you like Seahawks football or football in general, I'm going to be doing a lot more just NFL content, not just Seahawks. Please like and subscribe, and any support means the world to me. And we'll be back next time. Peace.